A new report from the New York Times, which is taking a behind-the-scenes look at President Trump's push for sweeping authority over the entire executive branch. It centers on a March ruling that the paper says crashed down like a thunderbolt in the legal world, that breaks with decades of precedent, accepting the White House's argument that Article 2 of the Constitution gives Trump the power to dismiss officials without due process, and details the pressure campaign that led up to the ruling. Joining us now, one of the journalists behind the piece, investigative reporter for the New York Times, Michael Schmidt. Michael, tell us more about what's at stake here.
Look, there's this thing that many of us have never heard of called the MSPB, the Merit Systems Protection Board. It's supposed to be there to protect federal employees for being fired for political reasons, for being fired unjustly. And basically what we found is that the MSPB for many decades was assumed to operate sort of like an independent court. They were supposed to be treated essentially like judges. And they were supposed to look at cases that came before them and adjudicate whether people had been fired, wrongly or not. The first year of the Trump administration obviously brought in a bunch of firings, a bunch of folks that were pushed out, and many that claimed that they were pushed out for political reasons. And the White House didn't really run from that at the time. And what we found out was that even though this entity is supposed to act like a court, the White House took a private meeting with the folks that run the MSPB and basically said to them, we're not telling you what to do, but we believe you're bound by what the Justice Department says because you're inside of the executive branch. And the White House later described this meeting as a job interview, which, kind of even muddies the picture even more. But whatever the case, the White House takes a private meeting with the folks that are running this agency. They basically tell them, look, wink, wink, nod, nod. And then several weeks and months later, the MSPB makes a decision that is extraordinarily in favor of the administration. It essentially gives the president the authority that he's looking for to remake the executive branch in a way that he can install loyalists and get rid of people who he doesn't think fall into line exactly with how he views the world. That's important because after Watergate, there had been these changes that had been made to the civil service that were supposed to protect federal employees from the political winds of the moment.
Got it. So John Heilemann has the next question. Heilemann.
Mike, I have a kind of a two-part question on this. One is, you've been covering over the course of these last 17, 18 months of Trump 2.0, the various ways in which Donald Trump has sought to expand the purview and power of the executive branch at the expense of other branches and just his own personal control over the executive branch. I'm curious where you think this ranks in the list, the litany that you've discussed in a lot of your reporting. Is this, in terms of its seriousness and its significance, where does it kind of stand on that list? And then secondly, how easy is it to undo some of these decisions that are getting made? Are these the kinds of things that have a potential of being enduring changes in how the power of the executive to reshape the federal government? Or is this a thing that a Democratic president in 2029, say, could easily undo with the stroke of a pen?
On the first question, in the world of how the government is supposed to operate in the eyes of good government folks, in the eyes of folks who believe that there should be checks on the government's power and that there should be oversight into how it functions, this is a great intrusion, because what has gone on here is that the White House has essentially taken a private meeting with one side in a case. A judge in a trial can't meet with one side without meeting with the other. That creates an appearance that doesn't look fair, and it potentially allows for that judge to be influenced by one side without the other being able to push back on it. In this case, that is what happened. The White House basically sat down with one side and provided them with some guidance about how they thought they should rule. in any type of matter, one side's going to make one argument, one side's going to make another. Usually those things are made in private. Usually they're made at some sort of hearing. But when they're made in a private setting, it raises the question about what really went on in that meeting. Why was it that one side is sitting down? And in terms of executive power and pushing things, a story like this would dominate and be the, we hear this a lot, and I don't mean to fall back on the cliche of it, but in any other administration, the idea of a White House trying to influence the MSPB, although an obscure agency most of us have never heard of, would have been a big deal, a big scandal. The idea that they were trying to influence something that's supposed to be independent. But in this case, it fits into a broader picture and a broader narrative that you're laying out, in which the president has taken a maximalist view of his power and, undeterred, pushed it as far as he can. And I think this is the latest example of that.
The new reporting is available to read online right now. Investigative reporter for the New York Times, Michael Schmidt, thank you very much for coming on the show.